I am here with my good friend Jess Robinson, and we are going to try to make possibly one of the most boring subjects on the planet interesting, because it's information that you need. So Jess, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
My name is Jess Robinson.
And why you're so boring.
And why I'm so boring? The reason that I'm so boring is because I actually read insurance policies for fun.
What type of insurance policies?
Most specifically, and for our conversation, is homeowners insurance policies.
There you go.
So I've been in the insurance industry for about 20 years and love to sell and help people with their homeowners insurance policies.
And he's really good at it. So I invited Jess because I get asked a lot about insurance questions. Can I get insurance? How do I get insurance? During the course of a real estate transaction. So I brought Jess on so we can kind of do a deep dive and get you all of the information that you need to know regarding insurance in Iron County for your home. So let's dive in. Are you ready?
Yes. And if we can't get to the question that they have in this video, we can look at the comments and maybe address it in a future
That's great.
video.
Yeah, we'll do that. I get asked a lot, can I get coverage here? We have a lot of folks moving to this area who are coming from other areas where getting any kind of coverage is very difficult.
Most of the individuals that are having that issue are probably coming from California. And that is an issue simply because the insurance industry in California is regulated by the state. And so insurance carriers in that state have to abide by law, and some of that law says you can't raise rate. Many of the carriers, because they can't raise rate, or the process to raise rate is very cumbersome, are leaving or non-renewing. But yes, you can get coverage here in Utah. There are some hurdles that you have to kind of understand, and that is if you're in a mountain property, I'm talking Bryan Head, Duck Creek, Swains Creek, sometimes even into Mammoth Creek. It is hard to try to find coverage that is more affordable than what you would have paid elsewhere.
Okay.
Simply because underwriters now see most mountain properties as fire risks.
Right.
And if there's not a fire department in place or hydrants close by, that can impact your rate, and it can also impact whether or not the carrier will actually offer coverage.
Okay, so there are some exceptions on those mountain properties, but people can get good insurance here in the valley.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the major thing to do is to engage a local insurance agent, because local insurance agents know the area.
Yeah.
They understand maybe what a fire line score means and can help navigate that and apply to the correct carriers so that you get good coverage, so that you get good pricing. And that way you're not left without good advice when it comes to trying to find coverage for higher risk homes.
Has the cost of homeowners insurance gone up recently?
I'm going to answer that with one big word: yes. Some of the pressures that the pandemic brought into the insurance industry were unexpected by many of the carriers. They just couldn't anticipate it fast enough. So some of the supply chain issues, when we had losses, the cost of labor and materials skyrocketed during those times. And insurance carriers weren't collecting enough premium to cover the losses that they were experiencing. And insurance carriers really only have one lever to pull on, and that's rate. Either that, or they say, we're not going to take coverage, or we're not going to offer coverage, or we're not going to be in that state anymore, and they'll pull out. So they can do those three things, but really they're going to raise rate if they're not making enough money. On average, carriers in the United States, for every dollar that an insurance carrier took in that time period between the beginning of the pandemic and right up until 2024, we're starting to see some softening in that cost analysis. But right up until that point, for every dollar that the carrier took in, they were paying out almost $1.25 in costs.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so they're trying to make up for that. So yes, insurance costs are going up. But if you want to compare Utah, the Intermountain West, and if you were to take all the states in line, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, we have pretty darn good rates when it comes to comparing to the Midwest, where we have massive hail and tornado risk, and to the coast, where we have fire in California and hurricanes in the southern part of the United States and the Gulf Coast.
We got it pretty good here.
We do, and our rates reflect that.
Ways. Yeah.
It's not that they're the same as they were 3 years ago, because they're not.
Yeah.
They're going to be higher.
Okay.
And most of that has to do with an increased risk that we've seen from our weather. And some of it's colloquial, some of it's, big winds, and 2 hailstorms in the last 5 years that have had catastrophic damage in Iron County. Talk about, hundreds of homes having the roof replaced.
Okay. And because of that, the carriers respond and say, well, now you're clearly a higher risk area.
We
and
know
so
that
the
it can
rates
happen
go-
here.
Okay.
We're going to try to compensate for that in rate so that we can cover the costs
Okay.
and still make money as an insurance
Yeah.
carrier.
Okay. Why is my homeowner's insurance so expensive?
So some of that has to do with what you're comparing it to, or how long you've been with your current carrier. Most carriers, if you've been with them for more than about 5 to 7 years, you've experienced rate increases over that 5 to 7 years, and it's probably time to either go to your local insurance professional and say, hey, we need to reset this. And most insurance professionals have some option to do that. They either have a new product or they have a carrier that can kind of reset that down a little bit. You're still going to see rate increases just because that's what insurance carriers do. They raise rate over the course of time. But if you're experiencing that now and you've been in your home 5 to 7 years, it's time to look.
That's
And
interesting.
that's not a sales pitch. It's the reality. You need to be looking about every 5 to 7 years.
So I want to make sure that I understand. So when you say a carrier is like Farmers or Progressive or
Correct.
all of the other folks that you've got us dialed into
Yep.
with our 36 insurance policies that we have with
Count
Jess
them.
Robinson. I did. Okay, so going to somebody like you and I say, hey, you've had my insurance policy because we've been in our house for 7 years. Let's look at that, and you might be able to place that with a different carrier
Or
and
there
reset that.
might be a new product available through the same carrier.
Okay.
Ask the question.
Yeah.
Make that insurance professional earn their money. Insurance professionals earn a commission based off the premium.
Right.
And they get that whether you have a claim, whether you have a question, whether you engage them or not. You might as well have them earn
Yeah.
their money and get the benefit from that.
There are a very few areas in Cedar City, Iron County, that are in a FEMA flood zone that a mortgage lender is going to require flood insurance. Can you talk to us a little bit about flood insurance?
Yes. So flood insurance, especially when you're having a loan associated with your home purchase, can be impacted by where that home actually sits. In Iron County, especially right here in Cedar City, it's going to be the Coal Creek drainage. And most of that, especially if you're in proximity to the actual water course that is Coal Creek, has some pretty significant flood zone portions where you have to have coverage, where the lender's going to say, you're in a flood zone, and in order for us to close a loan, we have to have flood coverage. Now, the good thing is you have two options when it comes to flood insurance. You can purchase it through the NFIP, which is the National Flood Insurance Program, and that's through the government. Most of the mortgage companies recognize and understand what that coverage does and what it doesn't do, and they're going to accept it as part of your mortgage process. There are some standalone and flood-only coverages, carriers that offer only flood, or they'll offer like a series of perils like flood, earthquake, and subsidence, which are things that aren't covered in homeowners' policies.
I imagine subsidence would be pretty expensive as far as
It
coverage.
is.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. But when it comes to flood insurance, you have two options. You can go to private carriers, private flood insurance, or you can go with the NFIP program, which is through FEMA.
Okay. And that is something, and it happens occasionally, not regularly, but occasionally we will have a buyer who wishes to purchase a home in one of these designated areas, and they will have to have that extra layer of insurance. And it can be fairly expensive.
It can be. The entrance of the private carriers into the flood market has actually made the competitive premium much lower
Okay,
than
good.
it's been in
Good.
decades,
Yeah.
from what I remember.
So if you are in that situation, we will find coverage for you. We'll make sure it's as affordable as we can possibly get it. Why is it important to have somebody local? If someone is moving to this area, or if someone has been here for a while and maybe wants to switch, why is it important to talk to you instead of just going online and saying, I want a policy from Geico or whatever?
So online carriers are honing in on home buyers and auto owners simply because they know that they can catch a certain portion of the population in what I call the good, better, best scenario. You'll put your information online and they'll give you three options. A good one, a better one, and then the best one. And the pricing is according to good, better, best. The value that a local insurance professional can bring to that scenario is that, one, they know where that home is. They understand what type of contents you're putting in it. Online carriers sometimes will ask the question, but might miss the mark when it comes to how do I insure my jewelry? How do I insure my art? Online carriers just don't have the bandwidth to do all of the questions all at once, whereas a local insurance professional is going to be asking the questions about, do you have collectibles? Do you have a casita that's separate from the house? And how do we cover that one effectively if an in-law's living there? Or maybe you have a separate rental property on the same premises as your residence. In that scenario, a local insurance professional can make sure that you have the coverage that you need.
Well, I think it's important when you're talking about having somebody local, to your point, to make sure that everything is covered that you need to have covered, and that you don't have coverage maybe that you don't even need in a policy, so that it's the right fit for that homeowner. Guns. You got to cover guns in this area.
Must I?
You must.
Homeowners insurance can cover firearms. Most homeowners insurance are going to limit the amount of firearms that they cover, usually around $1,500 to $2,500, depending on the carrier.
What?
Give me a second. Give me a second. So that's what comes with the policy without you even saying I have firearms. There's coverage for that.
Okay.
But if you have a gun room where you keep all your firearms, you can expand and what we call endorse coverage onto your homeowner's policy that will consider the value. And if you want to list your firearms, you can also do each firearm individually by endorsement if you have high-end or collectible firearms.
Okay. And that just goes tax onto your
just like jewelry would.
Homeowner's policy. Okay, cool. What do you wish more people knew about homeowners insurance?
On average, a homeowner's insurance policy is about 90 pages long. And I read them, not just because I'm in the industry, but because as an insurance professional, I want to make sure that if there are differences in coverages, that I'm giving good advice. And so I do peruse insurance policies. And if I had to pick something that I thought people should know more about insurance, and that is how they're covered.
Yeah.
What's covered, what's not covered, and then what does my premium go toward? So if I have a loss and I've paid premium for 10 years and then I discover that that specific thing, like the greenhouse in the back of your yard, is specifically excluded from coverage, but I've paid premium for 10 years, it's a really uncomfortable situation for local insurance professionals to have to come up and say, it was in your policy and it has been for 10 years. That exclusion has been there. So the thing that people really need to understand is how they're covered, what's covered and what's not covered. An insurance professional can give you a summary of that, but like anything that you're investing money into, especially if you're putting a lot of money into it over time, be a good consumer and learn about it.
So I have to read the policy?
I would highly recommend that you do. Not just to fall asleep at night, because it'll do that. If you have trouble sleeping, just read an insurance policy. Better than medication.
Yeah.
You will be asleep before you know it. But if you're putting that much money into it, it's kind of like buying a vehicle, putting it in storage, paying the insurance, and never taking it out of the garage to understand how it works. And then you pull it out for the first time, and you wonder why it doesn't work right, because you didn't get into it, you didn't understand how it worked. For as much money as people put into insurance, you really, really need to read your policy. And if you have trouble reading that, make that insurance professional earn his or her money by sitting down with them.
That's what I was going to say. I may or may not read all of my insurance policies, but I do lean on Jess to make sure that I understand at least the highlights of what's going to be covered and what's not going to be covered. What are some of the common liabilities that you see in the area? What are some of the common claims that you have to deal with in the area?
So homeowners insurance covers property and liability, and probably 3 or 4 major liability issues that we see in Iron and Washington counties are slip and falls are number 1. So this is usually Iron County because we have ice. And so slip and falls at the residence sometimes result in a claim against the homeowner for not clearing their walk or whatever the case is. And this is often common with commercial insurance for your business as well. So slip and falls, but homeowners, here are the three: trampolines, pools, and dog bites.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the three major ones that homeowners insurance does cover. I mean, there's coverage for those types of things, but there are some things that you'd want to do to kind of mitigate those liabilities against you, and that is carrying a liability limit that is appropriate for you, that protects the assets that you have. If you have more than one home, more than one rental property, having higher liability limits protects those assets against lawsuits if you had a pool accident or a trampoline issue, or your dog tried to take a chunk out of a passerby. Pools, pool accidents are never pretty.
Yeah.
And you've heard horror stories across the internet about deaths and maybe paralyzation and things like that.
Right.
The fact that you have a pool means that you have an increased liability and you have an increased responsibility for the safety of people. Same thing with a trampoline. If you have a trampoline in your yard, you need to make sure that it is in, not the netting, but that part of the yard is fully fenced. Not because you're not trying to keep everybody out, but if someone opens a gate to gain access, then your liability is less because you had a barrier to entry.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And that's what insurance carriers want to see. They want to see a fully fenced yard if you have a pool or trampoline.
Okay. If I've got a buyer and the buyer purchases a home and the buyer wants a homeowner's insurance policy, or is required by their lender to have a homeowner's insurance policy, talk a little bit about things that are covered and maybe things that aren't covered that surprises people.
Okay. I'm going to have to speak in generalities because there are many carriers and many coverage forms that address different types of perils, different types of things that can happen. But in general, most things that happen to a home that are sudden and accidental are considered covered. So think about like a water loss inside the home where a fixture fails. So the supply line to the toilet breaks. That's a covered loss, sudden and accidental discharge of water. Again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not a claims adjuster. I need to put that disclaimer in. But the majority of carriers will cover something like that. Sudden and accidental is like wind, fire, so long as it's not arson. Those things that are sudden and accidental are considered covered by most insurance carrier policy forms. And water is one of them. But also water can be very limited on some carriers' forms, such as if it comes up where it was supposed to go down. Sometimes you have to endorse the policy to have something that covers water that comes up a drain when it was supposed to go down.
So like if you have a sewer backup, that may or may not be
covered under a
depending
standard,
on,
like a bare bones policy, you'd want to endorse that. So things like theft, vandalism, fire, wind, tree falls on your house, things like that, sudden, accidental, there's coverage for those types of things. The major things that are not covered under a general homeowner's policy are flood, and I'm not talking about interior water damage, I'm talking about exterior water coming into your home. Flood coverage, flood damage is not covered under a standard homeowner's policy.
So that would be something where someone needs one of those special flood policies in order to be covered by water coming in from the outside.
Correct.
Okay.
Statistically speaking, homes that aren't necessarily in a flood zone, that aren't required to have flood, experience flood damage just as often as homes that aren't in flood zones. Especially here in our little valley, if we get isolated rain showers, we can have neighborhoods that are elevated have massive flood issues, and we've seen that in the last 3 or 4 years.
We don't have a spring runoff problem here, typically. Like if you were on the Wasatch Front, you would probably experience more of the spring runoff flooding. But we do have monsoon rains, and that has caused some damage in the last few years.
We've seen some catastrophic stuff from monsoonal rains. So flood, not covered under a standard homeowner's policy. Earthquake, not covered under a standard homeowner's policy, though most homeowners insurance policies can be endorsed with earthquake. You can have earthquake coverage endorsed on your policy and have coverage for that. And the final thing is subsidence, which is the sinking or giving away of ground, not covered under a standard homeowner's policy. So that's what I normally tell clients when I'm meeting with them and they want to know what's not covered. We'll go through the items that are covered first, and then those 3 major ones. You can purchase coverage for flood, you can purchase coverage for earthquake, Sometimes you can get coverage for subsidence if you think that it might be an issue. The majority of the time we see subsidence is usually how the home was built, and it's not necessarily an issue with the surrounding area, it's workmanship.
Right.
Usually installation or improper compaction or something like that.
I would agree with that. Okay, anything else that you want folks to know about what you do or insurance in general?
If you're moving to the area, the best thing you can do is create a relationship with a local insurance professional who, one, understands the area, and two, probably has a fairly good rating on like Google or has some interactions with other entities in the community so that they're connected well enough that they can serve your needs depending on what they are. If you're moving here as a homeowner, a business owner, an investor, having a local resource will pay dividends in the end because you'll know how you're covered and know where your premium insurance dollars are going.
I have nothing else to add. That was great.
Thanks, Jenny. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming in. Jess Robinson at Farmers Insurance. He's great and he's been here forever and he can really help you with anything insurance that you need. We'll see you next time.